Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining today. Just give it another couple of seconds. We're still waiting for people to join the meeting from the waiting room. Great. Okay, I think that's everyone in at the minute. I'm Francis. I'm head of programs and impact at the Fore, and
But
I'm
is the
joined
plan
by
to still
my
get them onto the thing?
colleagues.
Oh, Francis, I think you're muted.
Sorry, don't know what happened there. We're also joined by Isabel Cour, who is one of our strategic applicant consultants, and hopefully between myself and Isabel today, we'll be able to answer all the questions that you could possibly ask us. Um, so I think before we get stuck into asking any questions about the upcoming spring funding round, I thought just very quickly I'll rattle through a little bit about who the Fore are. I'm sure most of you will already know us reasonably well. And then I'll also just give you a little bit of an overview about the upcoming spring funding round and the timescales for that. I'll try to keep that really quick because I just basically want to make sure we leave enough time so that you can ask as many questions as you like, really. So who we are. So we're the Fore. To date, so far, we've funded over 600 charities across the UK. Um, and essentially, we like to think we do things a little bit differently. We focus on smaller charities because often it's the smaller charities that are overlooked in funding. So that's why we specifically look at charities and social enterprises that have a turnover of less than £500,000 a year. We look for strength of leadership of those organizations and the transformational potential that any funding ask you might submit to us could have. And essentially, we focus on unlocking potential to help your organization be the best that it can be. And that can mean many different things to different organizations, from introducing efficiencies to help you scale up, bringing in more staffing capacity to help you overcome capacity blockages, that sort of thing. So, what do we offer? We offer grant funding of up to £30,000 that can be spent between 1 to 3 years. The funding is used to fund transformational asks for the organization itself. So anything that can help your organization transform. We don't sort of fund typical programmatic asks. So for example, it might be something that will help make you more financially sustainable and resilient in the long term. We don't just offer funding, we also offer a range of other support that goes alongside that. So we offer pro bono support from our pro bono network members. And they are professionals who can offer their expertise in a range of areas like IT, marketing, financial forecasting, and legal as well. We also offer a host of workshops and training sessions. And for all our portfolio organizations that receive funding from us, we also offer a free impact measurement training course if it's something that you think as an organization you would like to work on. And we like to think that taken together, all these strands come together and essentially help unlock the potential of your organization. So yeah, I think that's enough about the Fore. I'll just very briefly give you a little run through of the spring funding round, where we are with that and what the dates are before we kick open for questions. So the first step in the process, if you want to apply to the spring funding round, is to register your interest. And the link to that is now up on our website. Registrations open today at midday and they open until next Wednesday at midday as well. So that's the 11th of December. Registration literally takes 2 minutes to complete, and it's just to let us know that you're expressing an interest in applying for the funding round. If you register, you will receive confirmation of whether or not you've been invited to submit an application for the spring funding round by the end of next Thursday. So if you've registered and you haven't heard anything from us by the end of next Thursday, then just give us a shout. Unfortunately, if we have more registrations than we do have application spaces available, it will mean that we will need to randomly select people to invite to submit an application. But as I say, you'll find out either way whether you've been invited to apply by the end of next Thursday if you register. So then if you're invited to apply, you will then basically have from next Thursday until 5 p.m. Monday, the 13th of January to get your application into us. And then essentially your application will sort of be assessed by our strategic applicant consultants like Isabel. And a little bit about this process there. The first stage of the process we call stage one initial review. And that's essentially where our consultants will do a sort of assessment of each of the applications that come in with the view to taking 30% of those through to a second stage, which we call ideas testing, which basically kicks off with a phone call or a Zoom call with yourselves as charity leaders and the strategic applicant consultant to ask more questions about your application and to unpack anything that the consultant thinks would be useful to unpack. And then that sort of stage two process will continue iteratively. So if after the ideas testing call, the consultant has more questions or queries, they'll come in on email or quick phone calls or whatever sort of works for you guys. And then essentially, as we go through that stage two process, applicants will gradually be whittled out. And then we get to the stage three process, which is the funding panel itself. And with that in mind, you can expect funding decisions to be made by late March, early April next year. So yeah, so that's enough for me about the process. It's all available on the website under the applying for funding section. So yeah, and Isabel, sorry, I didn't see you at the start when I was joining, but you just want to briefly just say who you are and what your role is as a strategic applicant consultant, maybe before we kick open for
Yeah,
questions.
sure. My name's Isabel Delacour. I've been working in this role for the Fore for a couple of years now. I think I'm probably up to my fifth or sixth funding round. And my background before I worked for the Fore is I have managed grants programs. I have worked in the voluntary sector in frontline homelessness, and then I moved into a more policy campaigns role in homelessness, working with politicians. And then I moved into local government, where I worked on like public sector service improvements, working very closely with the voluntary sector. And then I managed a grants program. It's really specializing in the voluntary sector. So I bring all that experience to all the applications I bring. And one of the things with like the voluntary sector is often the person reading the application could very well be very experienced in that field. And I say that to give you assurance, there is that sense checking. So when I come into those meetings, very much like if I can begin them by saying, oh, I've actually done that job and I understand completely where you're coming from. And then there are other people who have this role who come from a completely different perspective. And they offer more of that like Francis, you would be better than me to say this, but they offer more of that business mentoring, organizational growth angle. So the two complement each other quite well in bringing different skill sets into those meetings for the 30% that we speak to in those ideas testing meetings.
Yeah, definitely, Isabel. And kind of just on that before we go into the questions, yeah, I think those sort of ideas testing meetings, even if you're not taken further at that stage, 9 times out of 10, you'll walk away with hopefully something useful that you can feed back into the organization. And Isabel, I'm just kind of thinking of the autumn round, which we've literally just finished. and the sort of work you were doing with some of the organizations that you were speaking to around their sort of comms and how they describe themselves, and just sort of making sure that they're not alienating potential funders in that process, and just making sure that, you know, that they're describing themselves in the sort of most compelling way possible. So that's kind of just a nice example of one of the ways we're able to offer support, really.
Yeah, very much so. You give feedback at every stage, which I think is a bit different from other funders, definitely funders I've worked with previously. I had one of my jobs was to introduce feedback to unsuccessful applicants, and the reason it's so challenging is the sheer volume, and it is so difficult to give feedback because of the sheer volume. But those ideas testing meetings enable you to have a conversation, not feedback, just have a conversation with a funder about, did that land? I wrote this application. I've been copying and pasting that introductory paragraph in all my funding applications for 6 years. And you get the opportunity, did that land? Did that answer you? Did you have any follow-up questions on it? Did it work? And I will honestly say, no, it left me with more questions than answers, or no, that completely nailed it. I'm completely on top of what you do, and that's really good. So it enables you to have that conversation.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Isabel. So yeah, I guess we can maybe throw it open to questions now if anyone would like to put your hand up, or also if you don't want to yep. Oh, I can see there we've got Angela ready to go. Angela, do you want to go with the first question?
Yeah, thanks very much. Just wanted to say, if I may, it is just so refreshing to hear about some funding that is about core unrestricted funding that's about building capacity and resilience. It's just exactly what our sector needs right now. So, yeah, just wanted to say that. And just then a really kind of practical question was around what the kind of reporting requirements are from organisations if we're successful in funding.
Yeah. Isabel, shall I take that one? Is that okay? Yeah. So with the reporting, Angela, we're really mindful that we don't want to be one of those funders that you end up spending a really long time filling out forms and jumping through hoops. So we do try to keep the reporting really, really proportionate. So basically, the way it works, if you have a grant with us over 1 year, at the end of that 1 year, you'll have a 45-minute Zoom chat with us. We'll basically just check in on how things went over the last year. So sort of programs, delivery, fundraising, income generation, how things are going on the staffing front. And then we will also ask basically how you're doing against targets that we set out at the grant's outset. And they are the targets that you'll put in your application form. And Isabel, the likes of Isabel, will do a lot of work with applicants and sort of refining the targets during the actual assessment period. But if you get funding from us, we'll basically just check how you progressed against those sort of finalized targets at the end of the process. And then we will basically, after that call, issue a really short survey form that basically asks you a handful of questions, which is, for example, number of beneficiaries you had last year, number this year, number of volunteers last year, number of volunteers this year, income last year, income this year. And that's basically it. If you have a multi-year grant from us, so if your grant is over 3 years, you'll have 3 calls with us, one each year. But that's it. There's no reporting that we ask you to do. We try to keep it as light touch as possible, really. And Isabel, kind of just on that subject, because I know you've done quite a few of the monitoring and evaluation calls as well. I don't know if you wanted to talk maybe a little bit more about that process, or if there's anything that you wanted to add in, coming at it from the perspective of maybe, advising people when they're encountering issues on the phone call with you. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, for the monitoring calls, so we give an hour. We have for the monitoring calls, they're an hour long, and it's just an opportunity to reflect on how the year of the grant funding has gone. So it is very much a conversation rather than have you done this, have you done that? It's like, what, how have things evolved? What you said 18 months ago in a funding application and the twists and turns of life, they don't always align. So it's more of like, how have you pivoted if there have been challenges, and what were those, what caused it, like what happened? One of the things that would be really, really useful if any of you are successful is to come to those meetings knowing your targets, because it's amazing how many applicants come to those meetings and go, oh, what did we say? We would deliver, like, and then you have to have lots of follow-up emails afterwards, and you don't get that necessary conversation about just, we said we were going to do this and then we did this. And, sometimes there is a variant, be it positive or negative, and it's just an opportunity to reflect on those, and also a general conversation about growth and other funding, because often people apply to the Fore in their funding applications, and in the panel report, if they're successful to get to panel, it's all about increasing income and having more capacity to have a earned income stream, or to free up capacity to put in some other funding applications. So even if it's not directly in one of the targets, it's still a useful conversation to have about, I had more time to dedicate to this area of growth. And so to come prepared with that info.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I think hopefully that answers your question, Angela, but it's sort of very informal and conversational, and it's not about sort of tricking people or trying to catch people out or anything like that. And also just to say, if you don't want to give your questions verbally, just feel free to put them into the chat as well. Leonie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting this. I work with a charity called Roots Radical Learning, and we have a very undeveloped site. And I was wanting to know whether the definition of transformational would include site development that could then potentially really expand the programme.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that certainly fits the bill. But Isabel, I don't know if you want to give a flavour of maybe if someone was submitting an application of that nature, the types of things you might like to see in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. I've had a couple of them, and I have been lucky enough to take one to funding panel, and I know exactly the questions I got asked. So for the fund, to get the funding, I would be looking at how much legwork has actually been done. It's quite difficult to prove a case for transformation if you're at an exploratory stage. So I had an application recently very much around looking for new premises to enable growth. But what wasn't so tangible was like, how realistic were the figures? Like, how much would new premises cost? What is, like, more tangible things rather than the broad brushstroke, these are our hopes, because there are definitely stages of scoping that out, aren't there? So I would want to have quite a firm grasp on, like, not at the feasibility stage, like 2 or 3 stages beyond that, with some hard facts and figures.
Thanks, Isabel. Leonie, was that helpful?
Yes, that was really helpful. I think we are at that stage, so that's incredibly helpful. Thank you, Isabel, and thank you, I don't know your name, sorry, the Fore.
Yeah, not the Fore. Thank you. So I can see there's a couple that have come in to the chat. So I can see from Catherine, do you welcome qualitative evidence such as case studies to add value to reporting? Catherine, I'm assuming you mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, after you've got the funding from us and to sort of help with the monitoring and evaluation process. It's entirely up to you if you want to send across, additional qualitative evidence if you think that's useful, but we don't ask for it because we're mindful of your time. But, if there's a really interesting case study there that you, for example, would like us to share as one of our portfolio organizations, then we'd be sort of happy to perhaps collaborate with you on social media or something like that. But it's definitely not a formal requirement, but you can send as much or as little information as you want in that regard, in addition to sort of the standard things that we ask for. Angela has asked, what attachments or evidence are required along with the application? I think in terms of attachments, we ask for a set of annual accounts if you've got them. And there's also, if you look on the Fore's website, we list a couple of different things that we expect to see in the application form itself, including a little financial table that sets out your three historic financial years and three forecasted financial years. But Isabel, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add in terms of, I feel like it's all quite sort of clear and listed out on the website. So hopefully when you look at it, you'll see that it's quite proportionate in terms of what we're asking for. And then Patricia has asked, regarding the professional help that you mentioned in the training sessions, are these only for people who have received funding from the Fore? So the pro bono support is largely for organisations that have received funding from the Fore. However, our strategic applicant consultants can nominate a handful of organisations that perhaps didn't make it through the grant panel, but who they think would avail of that pro bono support. So we would be able to offer that. And in terms of the training sessions, we run lots of workshops throughout the year. Any organisation can come to those. Some of them are free, but the majority of them, there is a fee that we charge. We don't make any money from running those workshops. We run them all at cost neutral. So basically the charge that we pass on to you essentially just covers the workshop provider's costs of delivering the workshop on our behalf. But they are quite competitively priced because we are obviously aware that organizations of this size don't have a magical money tree to be paying lots of money for training. So Kelly, actually, I wonder, you'll know this better than me. If you're an organization and you're interested in our workshop schedule and getting updates, what is the best way to go about making sure you get those updates?
Yeah, so hi everyone. So one of the key ways you can find out about our upcoming workshops and trainings is through signing up to our mailing list. So where we just send the odd email, just sharing details of our upcoming workshops and how to sign up for them. So what I can do is I can drop a link in the chat where you can sign up for this if you're interested.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Kelly. And then I've got a question from Lauren, and Isabel, I think you can do a much better job at answering this than I can, but it's basically, could you tell me more about the stage 1 application process and what's required?
Yeah, the stage 1 is 3 sides of A4 written out, and I don't know what's on the website, but it's quite loose. So very much for you to, 1, decide what you want to write, and 2, for you have the opportunity to copy and paste from pre-existing application forms, so you're not spending hours and hours and hours writing the perfect one to a set criteria. It's quite free form. And so from that, I will tell you exactly what I look for, like what you do, where you are. I'm reading 100 of these. So like, I know it sounds silly, but where you are and where you're delivering services just grounds the assessor. Like, I'm reading 100 of these, tell me who you are. And in this catches a lot of people out. Obviously, you don't lose any marks for it, but it just makes it a lot easier to understand your organization if now so many services are delivered online. So you might have been in a particular geographical area, but now you can deliver outside of that geographical area. And that really helped spelling that out. If you say are in the Northwest and you literally just work in Lancashire, that is a geographical area. Whereas actually, if you're now delivering online services to the Isle of Wight, put that in your application form, because or I've had online services to other countries, that gives a scale and scope of your organization to help understand what you're doing. So I do think all organizations get in the habit of doing that, in how society has moved on since the pandemic. So what you are, what you do, who you're doing it, like who your project beneficiaries are, what your outcomes, measures of impact, however you measure your impact, your leadership, and then what you want the funding for, a description about what you want to achieve through that funding. And the Fore's strategic objective is transformational change. So what you are applying for should somehow fit that strategic objective. So that would be about explaining how you're going to get some transformational change out of the Fore's funding. And I would definitely say you can't have too much detail on that. And that isn't something you can copy and paste from other applications. So feel free to copy and paste the majority of it, which you probably would have written 1,000 times in other applications. But if you have to give some required thought and time with your board to work out what you're actually applying for, then I'd say definitely put the focus on that last section about transformational change and what you want to achieve through the grant funding.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Isabel. And I guess sort of at that stage, as I kind of mentioned very briefly at the start, I suppose there's two outcomes. Number one, you get invited to then have that sort of more in-depth call with the likes of Isabel, or you won't be taken any further. But as Isabel said earlier on in the process, you will get feedback that is bespoke to you that you can sort of use for strengthening a future application, whether it's with us or whether it's with another funder as well. And then we've got a question here from Georgina, and we made an unsuccessful application last spring that got to stage 2 interview, but not beyond. Can you give us some tips about lessons learned and increasing chances for success in this round? We now have a new business plan to support a new application. I mean, obviously without, knowing the sort of the details, Georgina, but maybe I can give some high level pointers, and then Isabel, you can either tell me I'm completely wrong or you can add to it. But I think one of the most useful and simple things you can do if you're reapplying and you feel like you've taken on feedback from a previous round is just note somewhere in the application that you basically applied before, you got to stage 2, the feedback was X. As a result, we've done Y. And I think that just really helps the assessor, the consultant, because as Isabel said, she's got 100 to get through, and sort of going back through and opening up previous applications and trying to spot the difference can be really difficult. And obviously we don't want to miss, the change and how you've taken on board the feedback. So I think that's probably the most straightforward thing that any applicant who is reapplying can do, I would say. And again, it's kind of difficult without knowing the specifics, but I think just being as sort of detailed as possible, recognizing you've got your 3-page limit, is just really helpful. You've mentioned you have a new business plan to support a new application. And if in that business plan, for example, you're talking about perhaps a new service that you want to pilot or a new sort of geographical market that you want to get into, you might want to talk about, we think we have a good pipeline, or we've put the feelers out and there's definitely warm leads for this product. But Isabel, I don't know, is there anything else you would add to that?
I mean, I Personally, I love an application which can show the strategic link. So if you've got a business plan, if you've got a theory of change, if you, whatever you call it, you know, everyone, like, you don't have to have a formal business plan. Your charity might have decided not to take that route, but you will have a strategic document or a strategic vision. And if any, I think any application is strengthened by showing how this, because we're talking about transformational change, that should be linked to some strategic objectives. And that would show good management. And then as an assessor, I know it's more likely to happen because the board of trustees will be monitoring it. So the fact that you've now got that in place suggests you didn't have that in place before, which would go to the, like, I like them to be in place, because then I know if it is changing the organization, how the organization is going to run, because that's the objective of this Fore's funding, then you really need some sort of overarching thing to root that in, to make sure it actually happens and to make sure all the other parts of the organization are joined up in how that's delivered. So that would be a really, really good step. And that's probably quite good feedback, whoever gave it to you, to get that in place, to get it through a funding panel. And then there is just, sometimes this is just the honest truth, and this is the hard bit, you know, it's the honest truth that the Fore receives more applications than it can possibly fund. So it sometimes would just be made, you know, it's just going to be, it is very tricky to get them through just because of the competitive nature. And I hope that going through the process and receiving the comprehensive feedback that you got from stage 2 and everything else, that would strengthen all funding applications and give you a little bit more insight into all funding applications, which would hopefully then help you in other fundraising. That's definitely the feedback I've had from charities who have been unsuccessful at stage 2, that they've got a lot out of it, if nothing else, and to strengthen their organisational knowledge in other fundraising activities.
Brilliant, Isabel. Thanks so much for that. And then I can see Amanda has asked, can this be used for core funding? Yes, basically the funding can be used for whatever you think you need to bring about that transformational change that Isabel was talking about. So for example, I'm just coming up with examples here, you know, if, for example, you feel like your current monitoring and evaluation framework is sort of quite manual and labour intensive and sort of sucking up an awful lot of time from the sort of senior management team and diverting away from, you know, developing new partnerships and diversifying income streams, you might want to hire, I don't know, impact monitoring role into the team, or you might want to bring in, for example, a CRM system to automate a lot of that to then sort of save that time. So basically it can be for whatever you need it to be for to unlock that transformational change. The only thing I would say is we don't fund business as usual or continuation of existing things. So for example, if it was a role and it had currently had funding and the funding for that role was coming to an end and you needed further funding to continue doing that role, that's probably not something we'll be looking at, because there isn't a sort of trajectory, sort of step change in the transformation of the organisation. It's more a continuation of existing roles and existing activities. And what I would say, you know, if anyone is kind of interested on the sort of the types of things that we fund, if you go onto the website, we've got our little directory of the organisations that we funded in the past, and in there you can get a flavour of the types of funding asks that people ask for and what they're actually doing with the funding they've received, just to give you a bit of a flavour of the depth and breadth, really.
Can I just jump in with a
question?
Yeah,
of course you can. Yeah.
From my maths. Only because I can't find the hands up thing on my screen for some reason. Is there an opportunity to have an actual discussion with you guys before we apply around the most likely successful, I guess, focus for it, because I can, as most people sat on here, can think of 1,000 ways of spending that money. Is there room for discussion around it if it's a particularly complicated situation?
Yeah, I would say while I would love there to be room,
I know.
it's literally it's me, Kelly, and Rob who you see at the start. That's the program team, and then sort of we bring Isabel and the other consultants in the actual
Yeah.
round to do the assessment. So we just don't have the capacity. What we have started to
Yeah.
do though, recently is if an organization has applied 3 times in the past and has been unsuccessful, we will offer the opportunity for a chat. But I
Just
mean,
to get rid of them.
no, I mean, what I would say is, you know, we literally will fund anything as long as you can demonstrate that it leads to transformational change. So I wouldn't get too hung up on like worrying about whether it's a bit of a sort of out there request. I mean, Isabel, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to that.
No, but I have the habit of finding out there requests and being belligerent and taking them to panel and seeing if I can get them funded or not. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. So I think the key would be if it, like I was saying earlier about the something at a more feasibility stage is harder to secure transformation, like to demonstrate transformation, because you're not sure. You know, you are weighing up different options. You are going through a motion of, should we do this? Should we do that? And that you cannot demonstrate transformation when something is at that stage. So I've tried and I failed. So I can just pass that learning on to you. If we need to demonstrate feasibility to get something funded, that's one of my key lessons for taking things to a funding panel. And you are more successful to get funded if through the funding panel, if you can really demonstrate transformation. So whatever ideas you're weighing up, use that space in the application where it's like that's the detail of demonstrating transformation, whatever that might look like, but to demonstrate it, like with cold, hard facts, figures, you know, return on investment, whatever it is that your organization, that your request can demonstrate there would be transformation. So that might be, if we employ this junior member of staff, it would free up X number of days of a more senior member of staff to do, and then some real facts and figures of what would be achieved. Or if we bring in a new IT system, this is what we would achieve from it, to demonstrate that transformation.
Yeah, I get it. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabel, and thanks, Samantha. And I can see there's a gentleman with his hand up whose name I'm sure is not iPad. Would you like to go?
Actually, I feel really my name is iPad, which I feel really hurt about. People often say this. That's a strange name. No, it's not. No, it's Malcolm King. I'm in charge of the venture in Wrexham in North Wales. And thank you very much. This has been really helpful. I particularly like your answer to Angela's question about monitoring. It often feels like when you get a grant, you get punished for having got the grant by having to jump through extraordinary hoops. We've just finished off some levelling up funding, which is almost as bad as European funding. I mean, it really completely does your head in. But so thank you very much for so far. But I particularly wanted to ask about the limit that you would fund an organisation for. So our natural level of funding for the last quite a few years has been about 350,000, so under the 500,000 limit. But because we became the lead organisation for a partnership across North East Wales, so we're very local, just largely deal just with one big housing estate, biggest one in Wales, by a long distance. But and that's more than enough to keep us going, really, with the challenges that we're trying to deal with. But we became the lead organisation for a partnership with about 15 organisations, including both the local authorities and health board and so on, through a largish funding bid from the lottery, National Lottery, which took us over 500,000. But that we're kind of just holding that money. That's not just for us. That's for over a big area, and it's a mental health, improving mental health environment for young people across North East Wales. So, but that's not our natural size. So, does that mean that we're out of the running for it, or could we slip under the radar, as it were? And
I think, Malcolm, it probably means you're out of the running, but I don't want to give you the wrong answer. So if you could just email us after on info@thefore.org and we can sort of have a look at it in a bit more detail.
okay,
What I would say is we go by the income reported on the sort of last published set of accounts. So if your last published set of accounts on the Charity Commission website, if you're a charity, for example, is under 500k, we would go by that. So I don't know if that changes things for you, but we're definitely happy to chat offline. And you know, if we're not able to, if you're not eligible, we'll also be happy to have a chat about potential other sources of funding as well. So just follow up with this, Malcolm. But thanks for asking the question.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And then I've seen that Patricia has asked, can a new company that has been trading for less than a year apply for funding? Absolutely. There's no problem at all, Patricia, and appreciate you won't have a sort of set of sort of yearly accounts, but that's no problem.
Yeah, that's exactly was my issue when I was doing the registration, because we absolutely won't be anywhere near the 500,000. We can only kind of guess what we'll be getting, but we don't have anything to kind of demonstrate that. So that's good.
That's
Thank
fine.
you for that.
And yeah, and if we were progressing you forward, Patricia, anyway, Isabel or whoever the consultant is would maybe just ask for a set of your working accounts or something like that to see where you are at that point in time. And then Lauren has asked, would we require a cost breakdown at this stage? So, I mean, Isabel, maybe over to you on that, because I feel like you probably get that quite a lot.
Yeah. The Fore doesn't require one. Most don't have them. Lots of organisations are funded without them. I have to read 100 of them. If I have a cost breakdown, I'm so happy. It makes everything make more sense. Like you're reading descriptions of things which take up lines and lines and lines of text, which you're trying to get your head round. And if you have a little table of 6 budget lines, 4 budget lines saying this is how we'd spend your grant, I'm like, there are no words. I've just absorbed it in a millisecond. Like it's just popped out. And I'm like, now I understand what they're trying to do. So you don't have to have one, but it would be nice if you did.
Yeah, definitely. And it doesn't have to be really detailed.
No.
And yeah,
no.
I think
but if someone's saying, oh, sorry to talk over you. If someone's saying we would do that, we would, you can use a lot of words to say we would recruit to this, this, and this, and then it would be part-time and they would do this, this, and this. Or you could have like, one web developer at 0.2 equals whatever of the grant, and that's like 9 characters, and you've got your cost breakdown, and you've used a lot of words, a lot of space count, and a lot of your assessor's headspace to try and do something which you've just described in a couple of characters in a different format.
Thanks, Isabel. And then Catherine has asked, can your funding be for a proportion of overall costs needed to achieve transformational change. It can, but maybe Isabel, I mean, there's maybe some specific things you might be looking for if you see an application where we're part funding it. So it might be worth just shining a bit of light on that.
Yeah, so I'm just going to reread. Can your funding be for a proportion of overall cost? Yeah, then I would want to know. The thing that instantly springs to mind is this a house of cards? If one of the other components didn't happen, because we weren't involved in it, would the whole thing fall apart? So are we just the sort of the final layer on something to bring it all together, or are we a key component to it? Like if there were loads of other different elements, how I could imagine a grant panel saying, well, if all those other components didn't happen, what have they got a risk register? How's that being monitored? What they're doing? You know, are we investing in something that will never happen, which is beyond the organization's control because another funder fell through? You know, so there's lots of different components to think through. So I would, as an assessor, I would want to be seeing that in as much detail as possible, and what other proportions of the project are actually 100% concrete. If it is only an extra, like I took one's funding panel the other day, which was literally their extra component was really, really small. So the whole project wouldn't fall apart if that component didn't happen. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. But if there were 6 or 7 different components, then I'd be looking at how likely is it that it's all going to happen.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Isabel. And Dawn has asked, does your funding cover capital costs? Yes, it does. It's a nice, easy one for me. Gary has asked, we currently employ 2 caseworkers, but if we could take on 1 additional caseworker, we could provide our service to more individuals. Would you regard an application like this as continuing service, or could it qualify as transformational? So I would say, in that case, Gary, I would say if you were going to go down that route, I think there is a risk that it could be seen as too beneficiary focused. Now, obviously, you know, the sort of ultimate outcome of any transformation on the organization will be the end user. But I think maybe a way to think about it is how the Fore's funding will transform the organization in a way that can sort of sustain itself for the long term. So after the Fore's funding ends. So I guess maybe for me, the acid test for that would be, okay, so you bring in an additional caseworker. If the funding ask is that, and if after the Fore's funding ends, you then need funding from someone else to bring in to continue that additional worker, I don't think that would be transformational in the eyes of the Fore. But what, for example, could be transformational would be, for example, you know, perhaps if the senior management team were focusing on delivery as well, and you wanted to bring in an additional caseworker who could, yes, support more people directly, but also alleviate capacity from the manager. So to take away some of that delivery burden on them and to allow them to focus on maybe, I don't know, building public sector relationships for contracts, or being able to submit more funding applications or something like that, then that feels more sort of transformational in the context of the Fore. I don't know, Isabel, what would you say to that?
I think you covered it. That's exactly the type of things that we'd be looking for. What added, I always say to people, what's on your to-do list? Would that help you achieve what's on your to-do list? What is the to-do list that you never get done for the organization? And would that post, would that project or whatever help you deliver that? And if on your to-do list is securing more public sector contracts, and if a new caseworker would help you achieve that, then you can demonstrate transformation that way. But if it is to to see more people, then that is a really, really worthwhile thing, but the Fore probably isn't the right funder.
Thanks, Isabel. And I can see Lauren has said, for first-time applicants, is it better to request a smaller amount to increase the chances of success, or are full funding requests equally considered? Full funding requests are equally considered. Apply for the amount of money you need, because if you go in with a smaller amount of money, you might shoot yourself in the foot, because actually someone like Isabel might turn around and think that's not achievable with that amount of money. They're not going to get the transformational change that they want. So honestly, go with what you need, I would say. And then we've got Georgina, will the recording be available? Yes, we will make the recording available after this to everyone that has attended, and we'll, I think, also probably put it out on social media so that people who weren't able to make it could come along or can watch it as well. And then Lauren, if an organization has one part-time employee in a new role, would bringing in freelancers to help strengthen its foundations be something you consider supporting? I don't see why not, but Isabel, I don't know if you want to add any. I think that's enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Freelancers are a sensible way for a 1-year grant, or, you know, like you don't want to, that's very sensible, or short-term work. The key to that is around for the Fore, it would be to help strengthen its foundations. So whatever you need to do to strengthen its foundations, the Fore will consider.
Brilliant. Thanks, Isabel. So I think so that's all the questions in the chat. I don't know if anybody else wants to ask one. Otherwise, I think we're probably ready to finish up now. Oh, I've seen Nim. Would you prefer us to choose one thing to be funded, or could we choose several things that can bring about transformational change to make up the amount? Isabel, I think you should answer that one, because that's something we see quite a lot and it's a bit tricky.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to the House of Cards scenario. So what is most likely to actually happen? And if it's lots and lots of bits to make up one big thing, can lots of little bits go wrong? And that is for you to demonstrate and convince me otherwise. But my starting point could be, this is way too complicated. This is such a complicated application. They're trying to do so many things. But equally, if it is just 3 things, like 3 things you can manage, can't you? If it's 6 things or 10 things, that then starts to get really complicated. And your chief exec is suddenly spinning plates, managing loads of different small things. But if it's 3 things to make up a really good, strong foundation of something, then why not?
Brilliant, Isabel. Thank you. And then we've got Katie saying, if the work was related to infrastructure development, e.g. CMS, would you want to see evidence how this work would transform the organization and lead to further change? For example, time to develop new income streams. Isabel, I think that's for you again.
Yeah. With infrastructure, it's the detail. Is this a well thought through idea? Have you done market research? What CMS? How are you going to do it? What external providers have you spoken to? How are you going to manage this? As much detail to show that it isn't at a testing stage, but it's actually at a deliverable stage, because you may only have a short amount of time to deliver it. Yeah. And time to develop new income streams. Again, it just goes back to how much time do you need to develop it? Because if it is still really embryonic, then it's at the testing stage, and that is harder to demonstrate transformation.
Yeah. Thanks, Isabel. Okay, so if that's it then, as I said, we'll send the recording around after. If there's anything that pops into your head and you think, God, I wish I'd asked that, just drop us an email on our info@ inbox and one of us will get back to you. So yeah, just thanks very much everyone for taking the time out to come along and listen to me and Isabel. And yeah, I'll say if you are registering, I wish you the best of luck with everything. Brilliant. Well, take care, everyone, and thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.